welcome to day 7 of Vlognica, where the Vlognica illness has finally hit me. Obviously, I film these out of order, but it's late in the game for me and I'm ill. But that is not going to stop me from telling you about my favorite books that I read in 2025. And yes, don't worry about me, I will be immediately getting into bed after filming this. So at time of recording this, I have read 59 books so far this year, which is the most books I've ever read in a year. And there's still time to squeeze in a few more. I have some theories about how and why I've managed to read more books this year than any other year, and by a significant amount as well. The first is that I haven't really had any epically long fantasy series on the go this year. I finished listening to the latest Stormlight Archive book, Wind and Truth, in January. And then since then, nothing really to that scale since. I have been still reading fantasy, but not the big long ones. Clearly I needed a break after that. And then my other theory is that my child is older. This is the year that I stopped co-sleeping with him in his bed, and now I go to sleep in my own bed, which just means that I've got more time for reading physical books and just reading in general, and just more time to myself. Also, I will be doing a video looking at all of my Storygraph stats in January, so look out for that. Okay, I have some books. These are the only books that I have physical copies of that have made it on the list. Everything else was either audio or from the library. Let's leave them there for now. So in this video, I'm going to share with you my top 10 books that I read in 2025. All of these top 10 books I gave 5 stars to at the time of reading it, but I also have some honorable mentions because I feel like there is a difference between giving the 5 stars at the moment of finishing the book, just being like, oh my God, 5 stars, versus the kind of book that maybe wasn't a 5-star for you when you read it, but it stays with you. And it's one that you keep coming back to or keep thinking about for whatever reason, even if it wasn't like a perfect book for you. So I've got my top 10 5-star reads of the year and then some honorable mentions. And this top 10 is just in the order in which I read them. And we're starting out strong with So Thrilled for You by Holly Bourne. I actually listened to the audio book of this and loved it so much that I bought myself a hardback. I never read hardbacks, but I was just like, I must own this, and sent this to a bunch of my friends with personal notes written inside them. So if that doesn't tell you how much I loved this book, I don't know what will. But this book is about 4 different women, best friends from university, who all have different relationships with motherhood. Like each of them kind of represents a different kind of archetype, but they still feel like fully fleshed out humans and very real. But this book takes place at a baby shower that gets set on fire. So you know at the beginning that there's been a fire, and then it takes you back in time to the beginning of that day, and it's like a whodunit. Which one of these women set the baby shower on fire? And you get chapters from each of the different women's perspectives, and then you also get flashback chapters from when they were at university together as well. I adore Holly's writing. She is so funny and so precise about women's experiences without being on the nose. Like, you feel so seen when reading her books, and this book was just so skillfully done. Loved. I feel like I've talked about this book so much this year. Next up is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Again, listen to the audiobook of this, and it's narrated by my favorite, Julia Whalen. I love her voice and her narration so much. This was my first V.E. Schwab, and I just found it so heartbreaking and so magical. A young woman in 17th century or 18th century France makes a deal with the devil, essentially, to live forever. But she is never remembered by anyone. As soon as she is out of someone's sight, they completely forget about her existence. And so it follows Addie over 300 years of her life, experiencing life in this way. And then she meets somebody who remembers her in like 2014 in New York. And it's like, what is going on here that he is able to remember who she is? But I thought this storytelling was just so beautiful and also really satisfying. I love a happy, sad ending where things feel really resolved, but the characters don't really get what they want, but maybe they get what they need, or whatever happens is the only way that something can happen. I don't want to give any spoilers, but it was one of those books that for me felt like it had a very satisfying ending without it being a like, yay, happy ending. I enjoy an ending that is sad but feels resolved. Next up is our first non-fiction, and there's quite a bit of non-fiction on my list this year, and it is Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World by Naomi Klein. Again, listen to the audio of this, which Naomi Klein narrates, and all I have to say really is oof, oof. This is one that just had so much in it that I feel like I can't remember everything that she talked about, but it just being mind-blowingly good. The book essentially starts with Naomi Klein's experience of constantly being mistaken for another Naomi, Naomi Wolf. And Naomi Wolf is like an ex-feminist writer. Like, we literally read one of her books called Vagina for Banging Book Club back in the day. But this woman is like fully turned MAGA. And Naomi Klein is a very left-wing writer who hasn't turned full MAGA, and she keeps getting mistaken for this other woman. And so the start of the book is her exploring why it's bothering her so much that she's constantly being mistaken for this woman. And then the book just explodes from there in this exploration of doppelgangers in terms of having like a shadow self, but she also talks about shadow states. It gets incredibly deep and political. It looks at Naomi Wolf and like her journey and what led her, what turned her from a liberal feminist into this alt-right pundit. It really looks at the alt-right, it looks at COVID, it goes into vaccines and autism, it goes into Israel-Palestine. It goes everywhere, all while weaving in these stories of doppelgangers in literature and in art. It's fascinating. I feel like it's one that I need to get a physical copy of and read again and just like underline everything. It's not one that makes you feel great at the end of reading it, I will say. It's a very heavy book, but Naomi Klein is an incredible writer and thinker. Okay, another non-fiction. I feel like we're on a little non-fiction spree here. We've got The Right to Sex by Amia Srinivasan. This is one that we read for my Patreon book club, and I think it's definitely my favorite that we read this year. It is just brilliantly written, just so precise and concise. All of the words just so expertly chosen to get her point across in the best way possible. I was in awe, honestly. But it tackles themes around sex, feminism, porn, desire, incels, like so much stuff. It's different essays, and one of the essays is called The Right to Sex, and that's definitely one of the strongest in there. And then as a follow-up to that essay, because that essay had been published online previously, there's this like coda chapter, and that chapter, I've never seen anything like that in a book before, but that was also just so fascinating, where it was just essentially like numbered points, but it still felt really well written, even though it was essentially like bullet points. But it was like a follow-up responding to people's responses to that first essay. And so it was just fascinating to read, because it was like you're like in conversation with her. You've got the essay, and then there's just like all of these points of like, oh, some people said X, Y, and Z, and like, here's my thoughts on that. And like some of the points are like really long paragraphs, others are just like a sentence. That and the coda chapter after, just wow, so good. And another chapter that I thought was especially great was this chapter about romantic and sexual relationships between university teachers and students. She works in the university, so that's like the context and world that she is coming from. And I thought that chapter was a really great exploration around the themes of just because something is legal or allowed, does that make it ethical. And that chapter especially, but the whole book kind of really tackling this question of like, what is ethical sex? Such an interesting question. Next is another nonfiction. It's Patriot, a memoir by Alexei Navalny. Navalny was a Russian politician in opposition to Putin. He died in February 2024, and like the last third quarter of this book is like diary entries and letters that he was writing from prison where he died. This book is incredibly powerful and incredibly sad. It honestly took my breath away in so many moments, not just because of the things that I was learning about Russian politics and the insane amount of corruption, but also just Alexei's beliefs, his resolve, his attitude towards his politics and his purpose in life and why and how he did what he did. Like, the man was poisoned and yet still was like, I'm going back to Russia. I need to finish what I started. I need to continue because of how much he loves his country and loves its people. Honestly, incredibly inspiring, and it just feels like such a huge loss to his family and to the state of politics in Russia. But just such a fascinating book. I feel like I learned a lot, but also it was just very like, oof. Okay, we're back to fiction and slightly more cheery notes. I absolutely loved The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. Novik or Novik? I don't know. I have A Deadly Education, but the second book, which is The Last Graduate, which was my favourite in the trilogy, I got from the library, so I don't have the physical copy of that. But this is the Scholomance series, and I think one of the reasons why this is like up there in one of my favourite books that I read this year is a lot of the themes in the book around morality and ethics. And it really reminded me of The Good Place in terms of its explorations on moral philosophy. But with The Last Graduate and the Scholomance series in general, it has the practical applications of that moral philosophy. So our main character, Elle, actually has to live by these values. She is a witch with incredible dark evil power that can destroy and kill many a people, many a city, but she doesn't want to use it, and she's like actively having to like fight against her nature. And I just really loved that as this underpinning theme of the book and the journey that the main character goes on, because at every step of the way she's constantly fighting with herself of wanting to take the easy way out, and that might be to do something bad in the short term, but that in the long term may have positive outcomes. But at every turn, she always picks the hardest option, and you just gotta feel for her. It really does feel to me, in fiction, a practical example of a rejection of the means to an end kind of morality. Like, it doesn't matter like what you do, like in the small scale, as long as, you know, the grander picture is of moral good. Like, Elle would reject that philosophy. She'd be like, it's not good if you're having to do bad and evil along the way to get to that good. Anyway, I've gone like full themes and not explained what on earth that book is about. It's a magical school that is trying to kill all of its students essentially, and it's like a survival mode book. And I also really enjoyed a lot of the survivalist elements of it, of like the strategy and the alliances between students and like how they survive the school. And the second book, The Last Graduate especially, I just found it really interesting because Elle's status and power in the school has massively changed, and like how she's dealing with that in terms of navigating friendships and relationships. Speaking of witches, another favourite of mine this year was The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sanju Mandana. This is more of a cozy, witchy romance where you've got found family, misfit kids. I just found it a really funny and warm book, and it left me with such a good feeling. This one is about a witch called Mika who goes to work in a house looking after and teaching magic to 3 young witches. But in her world, she lives in a society and is part of the Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, where there are rules about witches not living together and not really interacting with each other because it attracts attention. And yet there she is with 3 young witches. 4 of them in one house. What's gonna happen? And there's a romance. But I kind of felt like that was secondary to what was going on, but I still enjoyed. This year, for the first time since I read the books when I was a teenager, I did a reread of the Hunger Games trilogy. And this was so good. They just have to be up there, especially Catching Fire. Like, The Hunger Games and Catching Fire are easily 5-star books for me. Mockingjay is a bit weaker, but just after the entire trilogy, I was a broken woman. Absolutely broken. But my God, these books hold up. They are incredible. They are so readable, so propulsive. I was in a bit of a reading slump before I decided to do the Hunger Games reread, and this was because a bunch of people in my Patreon Discord server were doing them, and I was like, I need to join in with this. This is gonna be fun. And it is such a good feeling when you just get a book that you just power through. And obviously these books hit a bit different reading them as an adult rather than as a teenager / young adult. And of course I want to rewatch the films as well, because I especially remember loving Catching Fire. Again, Catching Fire is just my favorite, but they're just so bleak, especially Mockingjay. The thing I always joke about with Mockingjay is that like Katniss is unconscious for most of the action. Mockingjay is just like things happening, Katniss getting knocked out, her coming around in the hospital room, and then people explaining to her what happened while she was unconscious, which is why it's not my favorite. But I do think one of the things that I really appreciated about Mockingjay this read round was how little agency Katniss has in this revolution. And it kind of just follows the theme of like the whole trilogy of her just being this puppet and pawn in the entire thing, and she's just a symbol and that's it, and she has no agency, like very little agency throughout the whole thing. And I just found that actually really quite interesting as a YA dystopian book, because within that genre of YA dystopia, we love our 17-year-old heroes to like have all of the agency and be really powerful and smart and strong and making the big decisions and like changing things. And I just think it's really interesting that one of the series that is arguably the most successful like YA dystopian series that there has been, our main character, yes, she is sometimes these things, strong and smart, but like not always, but she has very little agency, but it's still a great series because it just feels realistic that she is just a pawn in this game that is being played by the adults. She is a child and they're all using her because of this symbol that she's become by pure accident, but also kind of through her actions in the moments that she did use her agency. Through those specific actions, that's what turned her into the Mockingjay, the symbol of the revolution. Anyway, I feel like I'm maybe thinking too deeply about this series, but I just find it fascinating that our YA dystopian heroine has so little agency, and yet it's such a compelling series. Would love to hear your thoughts. The Hunger Games I'm counting as 2, because I would say The Hunger Games and Catching Fire are like 2 of my favorite books that I've read this year. Also, in terms of the ending of the whole series, if we go back to what I was saying about how I love an ending that feels resolved but isn't always happy, that's why I love the ending of The Hunger Games. Even though it breaks me, fucking breaks me. But in terms of the story, I'm like, yeah, Suzanne Collins, I understand. I know that you had to do what you had to do because it makes the story better. Oh no, now I'm getting sad. Okay, and then my final book of my top 10-ish, if we're counting The Hunger Games as 1, 2, or 3 books, is Careless People, A Story of Where I Used to Work by Sarah Wynne Williams. I also listened to the audiobook of this, which is narrated by the author. And this is a book all about Facebook. So Sarah Wynne Williams used to work in global policy at Facebook. And this book is fascinating and terrifying. She currently has a gag order from Meta, so she is not allowed to talk about this book or promote this book. And she's being sued. And Mark Zuckerberg really does not want you to read this book. And so if you use Facebook or Instagram, WhatsApp, any of Meta's products, I highly recommend you read this book. Obviously, Mark Zuckerberg does not come across well in this book. He kind of just comes across as an actual man-child with too much power and money. And this seems small, but it feels very symbolic and telling to me. But Sarah talks about in the book how when playing games, like board games and things with people, everyone would let Mark win, but he would have no clue that that is what was happening. And I can't stop thinking about that. And then Sheryl Sandberg also features a lot in this book. She is the Lean In lady, and oof, Lean In is a book that she wrote that's like about women in the workplace, like lean in and like women's rights in the workplace. And I don't even know, I've not read it. Lean In's kind of become a bit of like a meme and a joke at this point. But as Sarah Wynne Williams tells it, Sheryl Sandberg, complete hypocrite, is saying one thing with her book and her Lean In Foundation or whatever it is, and all of like the public talks that she gives about empowering women in the workplace and all of this. But she is saying one thing and does another. And some of the things about this woman in this book and the way that she treats other women and other mothers at Facebook, Sheryl does not come across well in this book at all. But the craziest part of this book to me, and the main thing that just like had my jaw on the floor, was towards the end, which is all of this stuff about China. Now, Facebook is still not in China, but Sarah Wynne Williams found all of these documents as she was working on China while she was at Facebook, of all of the things that Facebook were doing with the Chinese government in order to try and get Facebook in China. And it is horrendous in terms of data, privacy, human rights, censorship. Like, I already didn't trust Facebook, Meta, Instagram with any of that, but my fucking God. And then of course there's your classic accounts of horrendous toxic work culture and sexual harassment. But Sarah left Facebook / was fired from Facebook because she dared to speak out about the sexual harassment in 2017. And so the book also covers the 2016 US election, the first time that Trump got elected, and Facebook's role in that. And yeah, fascinating, horrifying. We're fucked. We're so fucked. Okay, I'm gonna lighten the mood with some honourable mentions. So these are books that I didn't quite give 5 stars, but either they have stayed with me, impacted me in a way, or just like one of those books that you read at the right time. You know? So the first one is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. This just still haunts me. It's not my favorite book, but it is one that is staying in there, for better or worse. And then we have Drawn to the Garden by Caroline Quentin. This is a lovely book about gardening. Do I have a garden? No. It's got stunning illustrations in it. It's funny, it's warm, it's whimsical. I read this when I was having a bad day, and it was like a warm hug. And maybe I'll pick it up again when I live in a house with a garden. Marabou Stalk Nightmares by Irvine Welsh. This was an absolute wild card book that I read for the video where I was doing the blind date with the books thing. This was one of them, and this was the most surprising shocker. Like, I would never have picked this up, but holy shit, this book was really disturbing, but really good. And it has made me want to read more from this author, but like in small doses, because was very heavy and disturbing. And then a final honourable mention that I listened to the audiobook of is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book was kind of a masterpiece in terms of its themes and scope and execution. Another one with a not happy but kind of satisfying ending. Yeah, fucking great book. I don't know why I didn't give it 5 stars. I don't think it like fully was for me, do you know? You know what I'm saying? I don't know. So near the beginning of the year, I actually made this video where I was talking about my reading priorities and my like 2025 TBR. And I feel like I got to a lot of the books on that list. But as I mentioned at the beginning, the one thing I didn't really get to was any of the big fantasy series that I want to read. I think I just didn't know where to start. Do I do more Cosmere? Poppy War. I want to read some Ursula Le Guin. Also, do I give Realm of the Elderlings another go? I would love to hear some of your recommendations of what fantasy series I should tackle next. I also found myself reading majority white ladies this year, and I want to broaden my horizons and diversify the authors that I read in 2026. So if you have any recommendations for me based on, my favorites from this year and the kinds of things that I like, I would love to hear your recommendations in the comments. Also, let me know your favorite books that you read in 2025. And I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I will see you tomorrow for the last day of Vlognica. Bye!